what I just want to share with everyone is just a short presentation from the Antigua and Barbuda / Caribbean context in terms of providing a new paradigm on fatherhood and what that means for gender equality and gender justice. So, looking at fatherhood and gender equality and gender justice, according to Promundo report, engaging fathers as positive, non-violent, and meaningful caregivers is critical to the development of children and to support equality in caregiving and broader gender justice. Also, the lack of an enabling institutional culture and supportive work environment determined from taking larger childcare responsibilities. In the Caribbean, as I'm sure is the case in many other countries around the world, childcare and caretaking activities are often left to women, and that includes taking their children to school, engaging with teachers, engaging with the staff in getting a feedback, understanding, and managing their children's scholastic activities, which take a significant part of their day-to-day life. So what we would have done in Antigua and Barbuda is to actually work with, and then we're gonna call Mr. Lynn's name again, to actually work with D-Driven's dads on an activity called Dads Take Your Child to School Day. So this was an initiative, and these are some pictures from that initiative, where a specific school was selected, and we would have worked with fathers in terms of highlighting school policy, personnel and procedures, answering relevant questions. Attendees were also provided with resources, services, and other recommendations for responsible childcare, fatherhood-related services. And we also address particular needs that they had during the session. So this session had actually been done in 2018. We had worked directly with one particular school, although we invited other schools to take part on their own. And it was also promoted on local TV. Very important in this initiative was that the activity was supported by the principal and staff at the school. So we did definitely have enthusiastic buy-in from the principal and from the other staff members to encourage fathers to actually attend and partake in this initiative. And this was not the only activity. This was actually a large part of a larger week where we would have engaged fathers as caregivers, and we would have had other activities with both fathers as well as boys. So the idea here was that, again, in the Caribbean, we do have issues where it comes to what fatherhood entails on and how it's socially seen. So our idea was really that we would encourage the fathers to come into a non-traditional space, provide them with resources and share their feedback. So over 30 fathers were actually able to attend the 1-hour activity, and the school is not a large school. There are a couple of hundred students. So we thought that the number of fathers that were able to turn out, take an hour off of work was actually pretty significant. Many fathers and father figures expressed happiness to be provided the opportunity to participate as caregivers. So what we have found is that in many instances, fathers did not feel it was permissible for them to even take part in caregiving activities. They felt that in terms of how it's societally viewed, that role is reserved for the mother, and for them to be even invited or considered, it was the first time that anyone had actually reached directly out to them and said, we need your feedback, we need your presence, we need your input in terms of caregiving activities. And we found that far from fathers being uninterested, many fathers were very eager to engage in similar opportunities in the future. So, what are the lessons that we learned? Basically, that men will participate in non traditional spaces once they're made to feel comfortable. And we would have realized that men's lack of participation is not always due to a lack of interest, but again, to societal pressure in conforming to gender roles. So as a result, we did realize it is very important to provide similar avenues, specifically to encourage men as caregivers, in order to help to promote gender equality as well as positive masculinities. So when we're looking at areas such as transformational gender change, we do need to consider that apart from just speaking to men and boys, and even apart from just engaging them, we have to provide spaces where they are comfortable to participate, where they feel invited, and where they feel listened to, as opposed to just providing information or providing a particular messaging that does not make them feel as if they are able to participate in how that messaging is created and delivered. So that was just a quick presentation by myself. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments. I know our time is short, but thank you for allowing me to present. And I hope that we will be able to get some additional support and feedback to allow us to continue these similar programs.
All right, thank you so much, Daryl. And so we had the 3 presentations there. And I think it's really important for us to, reflect on them and kind of look for opportunities that might present us as it relates to learning for us in this global space around best practices and things that we might be able to use, and things that we might want to improve on if we are to really affect gender equality. I'm mindful of how we use this space and how we share our time, and I'm very mindful that we've already gone over as it relates to our allotted time for this part of the discussion. But it's necessary for us to at least deconstruct some of what came out of the presentations, and I'm also going to do that in a way. And so I'm just going to connect with Craig to find out would it be best for you to present, and then we have the audience offer some feedback and support as it relates to these 3 presentations. Do it as a collective, or we dive in now? Just get a sense from my co-facilitator about how we navigate.
Well, it's a great question, and it occurred to me that we could really take a couple of questions now, while it's fresh in the audience's mind, about the few presentations that you've organized. It would make complete sense to take a couple of questions if we have 1 or 2. If you have a question to ask your presenters, that would be fine as well. Take a few minutes. I think that would be fine.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
And then we'll jump in.
Yes. And so in terms of, we're looking at moving towards gender equality, and I'm seeing Mosika, and we open the space, and perhaps we can have him make an intervention, him or her.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yes, the chat would be fine.
Yes, yeah. And the chat, yes. Just manage to.
Someone's raised their hands. Yeah, go ahead and speak.
Yes, thanks very much for the opportunity. My name is Musiwa Ramakwele. I'm from Lesotho. I just want to really register my appreciation for the good interventions that our presenters have put across. It's a really much appreciated job that they are doing. Just one question to Daryl, where they have fathers taking their kids to school. How did they manage those kids that don't have their fathers in their lives? Yeah, the single motherhood, as we say it. How did they manage those kids? Because I think, in a way, they had to do something. So I just want to see and hear what they did in regards to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Over to you, Daryl.
Thanks for that question. So what we did say is that we would invite fathers or father figures. So we did not specifically rule out women, but we did encourage to say that we would prefer fathers, but we didn't specifically rule out women. There were some grandparents, for example, who came because they served as a father figure in that child's life. There were some other relatives who were able to come in the instance where the biological father was not able to make it. So we encourage fathers, we encourage father figures to attend the session. So of course, we did not restrict anyone in terms of how they identified themselves as a father or as a father figure in terms of attending the activity.
Yeah, thanks for that, Darrell. And so we'll take Willow's intervention, and then I'll jump over to you, Craig, and hopefully
that's good.
At the time for dialogue, we will deconstruct some of the general thematic areas. Willow, over to you.
Thanks very much. So my question is for the second speaker, I think Joseph from Jamaica. I love the idea of having positive stories. I think that that's actually an excellent opportunity and an excellent strategy. I'm wondering though, what sort of benchmarks did you set? Because I know many people who think they're doing a really great job at parenting, but they aren't. So did you set some benchmarks? And if so, what were they? Over.
All right, thank you for that, Christian Willow. So the benchmarks. So we self-reflection. We want it to be true. We realize that going into fatherhood, we cannot have fatherhood without motherhood, and therefore we had to know that we're going to work with both sets of parents in changing the fatherhood narrative. So self-reflection, we wanted to go into the communities, to work with the communities, change cultures. Because men's cultures and men's subgroups are very, very different from women. It's a little bit more difficult to get men out. The benchmark really was participation of men, and how do we get there? Likewise, we need to know who the influencers were, right? And so all the communities have their own gatekeepers. We needed to know who the gatekeepers were, what the subcultures were, in order to effect some kind of change. The very language of fathering is very different from the language of mothering. So having identified that, we now needed to have the understanding of the language of fathering more prevalent, and we found that a massive difficulty because the general accepted language of parenting surrounds motherhood and mothering, and therefore we needed to get that out there, identify what the language is, where fathering is concerned, identify the differences, and also ensure that the narrative of negativity is not attached to the language where fathering is concerned, right? The levels of interaction, how we collect data, how we implement the project surrounding fatherhood has also been critical. And it obviously is still a work in progress, but those are some of the benchmarks. I hope I would have answered the question as to how we would have wanted to get this done. Critically, I did not mention that this project is really in partnership with another organization called Parenting Partners Caribbean, in conjunction with Clariman, and the impact has been good thus far. So we're looking forward to continue the collaboration. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Heron. And yeah, I'm not sure if or the person who's sharing the space as it relates to benchmarks, if it came out clearly. But I think it is a very important area that we should interrogate, Joseph, to make sure that we have a very clear sense as to what a father who's moving towards gender equality, what are some of these key requirements in terms of values clarification that should be coming up there if we are going to be using someone as a model. And that's a really, really good intervention. Thank you so much. So I'm going to take Gabrielle. I know she's from the Caribbean region, and so that she might be able to offer some comment and feedback and and then we jump over to you, Craig. And so just in terms of the intervention, we're going to just have it popcorn. It's going to just be 1 minute, and then we move on. Max 50 seconds, 1 minute close off as it relates to the intervention, so that we can allow and give lend the floor over to the other group. Gabrielle, yeah.
Oh, hi there. Hi, everyone. And I'm really enjoying this conversation. And hi, Joseph, Philip, Daryl, and others from the Caribbean and elsewhere. And just to echo your comments, Shaky, and also to say this work around fatherhood is continuing really important work that began by Barry Chavans from the mid-1990s. And so it's important to historicize the work, particularly coming out of Jamaica, on fatherhood in the Caribbean. But my question to follow up on something that you have been keeping on our mind is, how does this work on encouraging fathers to be more involved in the labor of care and the domestic labor of care? How have you found it able to translate, or how have you been able to move it also towards social norm change, to being able to to shift the kinds of norms and values that men may hold around the larger relations between women and men? So beyond sort of behavior change, have you found that these are important entry points for social norm change, for changing beliefs and values around gender-based violence, and so on as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much. And so it's something that we have to develop benchmarks around and make sure and ensure that whenever we're implementing programs that we can track that. And so, while it is very common sometimes in the Caribbean region for us to have ad hoc programming, it's so important that as a network that's moving towards this very, it's so important, but yet still, despite lots of efforts, gender equality cannot be realized unless our programs are developed to do so, and we're tracking them and monitoring them as it relates to that. I know I'm seeing Joseph is this a new hand, Joseph?
No, it's not. I want to respond to Gabrielle. Is that okay? Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So thank you for that, Gabrielle. I'm just realizing who you are. Well, hey, hi. You asked in terms of the whole, it's a long road. Our cultural practices are very, very deep, and they're centuries old. I don't have to tell you that. One of the strategies that we have been using is working through schools and through the PTAs. Persons have been making presentations and simply asking a basic question. Is there anything that a mother cannot do or a father cannot do compared to a mother? What are those things? And we're not talking about cultural practices now. So physically, are there things that you can do or you cannot do? And those things generally focus around simply childbirth and breastfeeding. Everything else, physically, a man can do, a woman can do. One can change diaper, a man can also do the same. Nurturing aspect of men and women nurture different. And it's just that the narrative generally has been that men don't nurture. And so we had to kind of redefine what nurturing means. Nurturing means the practice of nurturing is different for men, for fathers, as opposed to women and mothers, and that was where we had to start the narrative on, and that continuous discussion. Of course, the pushback has been massive but it's open a discussion, and there has been incremental changes, and we look forward. I think the more we have the discussion, the more likely that the questions are going to be asked, and some light bulb will go off in somebody's head to change their own personal culture and set the wheels in motion.
All right. Thank you for that, Joseph. And I'm going to just hand over to you, Craig. I'm seeing you buzzing over there, ready and excited to go. And we're excited to have you and share this space with you. So over to you.
Of course. Thank you, Shaki. And thank you, all of our colleagues in the Caribbean. These are wonderful programs. We can tell that we've had a good experience now with this, and the hard question of how you connect social change with education and working with dads directly. Working with fathers is an avenue we're learning. It's not disconnected with the overall set of values and social norms and context. I always talk often that there are more than one level of work, and one level is a level of messaging, campaigning, what politicians say, what leaders say about values and what they are celebrating. We can get our leaders to celebrate nurturing fathers. We're taking a step in the direction we'd like it to go, while we are doing educational work and engagement work and with dads directly. Both are good. Here in the U.S., we often like to encourage our sports figures to make mention, to be happy and joyful about their parenting as male sports figures that are considered heroes in the society. So these are the two levels that are important. And we're not presenting today much in the way of the campaign side and the message change side in the space. But that exists. And I hope we get to talk about some of that work as well, that level. We're here sharing our direct engagement work. And I'm happy for that. Let me switch over and say something about North America in particular and the US in particular. So this is not a Canadian context, though I know the work is happening across Canada as well as the US. I'm going to share just for a minute a curriculum that is very popular in my neck of the woods, which is the Northeast US. It's called Nurturing Fathers. You can go to nurturingfathers.com, I believe it is. I'll share the links, and I have a summary page that I'm going to share in the links that you can download and look at. It has a 13-week curriculum program for dads. And the story is that as we've gone along, our protective services at the state level to protect children from domestic abuse and direct violence is a very serious matter. It's a social work matter, it's a police matter, it's a state services matter, separating children for safety and so on. These practices in getting on the care and social work care, have had great expectations from mothers in taking care of their children. And often the practice was separating dads from the family for safety. This was unsatisfying overall for some quarters in thinking about men's lives. And what we managed to do in Massachusetts was to encourage our Department of Social Services to increase their expectations of fathers in the casework and to engage fathers in educational matters. And it had another dimension of racial equality, the disparities of health, and these indicators. Offering education and support works better than simply arresting people for not paying child support, which also needs to happen from time to time. But paying child support is only one dimension of what we expect dads to do in these cases. How about we expect them to be better parents? And so this particular curriculum has been adopted throughout our region and is regularly offered to dads in these caseloads. And I just want to show you the outline briefly, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you'll be able to get a look at this now. Okay, so Nurturing Fathers program is a curriculum that has been researched. It has a bit of evidence behind it. Nurturingfathers.com, and 13-week training course to teaching parenting and nurturing skills for men. These are 2.5-hour classes and are really direct skills related. You can see the titles of each session: Roots of Fathering, Self-Nurturing Skills, Taking Care of Yourself, learning that it starts with you, that you understand yourself, you care for yourself, going out to the world, thinking about feelings and nurturance, power and relationships, discipline and fun. Then go into how you engage your children. So thinking about barriers to that, anger, alcohol, substance and stress. This is the one place where this curriculum touches gender-based violence, if at all. I find in my experience, gender-based violence is the trickiest subject to raise in the fatherhood context. In fact, we're thinking of doing some specific work in the US to encourage our dads groups around the country to speak a little more directly and more carefully about gender-based violence. And so this is an interesting particular topic, and we know it's very important to us in our network. But I think we can be helpful in interjecting some additional ways to address that subject with dads. So then it goes into talking about working with kids and what are fun games, playing with children, all the way to thinking about taking care of babies. And so there is a topic called the father wound that is addressed in this curriculum, which has to do with missing your own father and not knowing your own father and not having a connection with your own father and how it might impact your sense of being with your own children. So this is a curriculum that is popular. It ends with a graduation, a ceremony, appreciation, and with some luck, you've created friendships and ongoing social supports for people being involved with their children. So I wanted to share this specific curriculum. There are others I know you'll find online and around, and you'll probably build your own, and you'll adapt things like this for your own cultural context, which I think is critical, and language. So I just wanted to share this in particular. So there you are. I'll drop this in the chat shortly, so you'll be able to look at this yourself. I'd like to now shift and tell you one more brief story, and then I'm going to hand it over to Coach Lynn, who's going to say something about his work with dads and deeds-driven dads. So I'm going to shift my tab, then assuming you can see this tab. This is the North American Men Engaged Network website, and we have what are called regular member meetups. And just this past week, we held a meetup on the father's role and the connection of gender equality, today's topic. I want you to know it was here. I'll drop a link to this page. I want to scroll down and show you, we have some videos here. We have a video trailer about Coach Lynn, which I won't show right now. We have the session is recorded and has some wonderful presentations from our colleagues in Texas. Emiliano Diaz de Leon is a longtime worker in this field, and he works with the Sexual Assault Coalition. So the purpose of preventing sexual assault is the launching ground for this work with men at large and with dads in particular that Emiliano has been doing. And there are some resources here, links, and of course a link to the document I just mentioned. So it is here. So I wanted to show you these two things that we have, and it's a resource you might want to take advantage of, taking a look at what we have available. So having said that, I'd like to ask Coach Lynn, if you'd like to jump in and join me, if you want to, Bianca, if you want to spotlight Coach, we'll chat back and forth a little bit, and then we'll see what he might like to share. So if you look up Coach Lynn and join us, there he is. Hey, Coach. Good to see you. How are you today?
Good day. Good day. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bianca and Shaki, the whole team. Good morning. The videos, the commentary today. I won't be long, guys. I know everybody's busy, and I gotta do a New York thing and move the car. Those from New York, you understand you got to move that car. However, I just want to say congratulations, Craig, on a fantastic presentation, as well as the rest of the presenters today. I just felt so proud, even to have my fingers in and out a little bit, to see that the growth and where the fatherhood movement is now, all these years.
Yeah.
And Shaki.
Well, you started how many years ago? You got involved with how long ago?
Well, it's been
30-something years ago?
Right, and just to be clear on that, the original and one was pinpointed in Jamaica. I can't wait to meet him. It started out of necessity. Many of us fathers, at that time, some of us were single dads, which was my case, really single, had a baby, to issues. We didn't have a port. We didn't have a voice. We didn't have anything in court or anything. Recognizing that fathers, hey, that's my DNA too. That's my legacy too. That's my bloodline too. And it really came out of necessity, and it just evolved to what we have today. All right. So I'll just tell you a couple of brief things, Craig, if you don't mind, about what our work. Craig has already highlighted. We were honored with the assignment, what we affectionately call the assignment. Those of us who understand that in life fatherhood has been our realm for many, many moons. And then all of a sudden the winds of life, Shaki, blew towards this gender equality. That's where we were needed to make sure that we build this bridge. If we didn't do anything else, that we understood the fatherhood audience as we could see today. And ladies and gentlemen from around the world, you more than likely have a fatherhood initiative where you are. We'll be able to help you find that, particularly with men's care. But the bottom line was, as Craig alluded to, in the conversations, and we've had it for many years, all across the world, rarely, if ever, was the issue of domestic violence or gender equality brought up. You spend an hour and a half talking about child support, talking about all this, and I can't see my kids. But then let's talk about you treating your females with honor and, time to go, I gotta go. So she had an excellent point. That is our mission now. That is our mission now, to build that bridge strong, because the synergy is clear. The inherent same road we're taking is clear. It's to build a strong family and strong community. And without the father doing his piece, more than just being a father to his children, a father to all your kids' friends. Greg, we said many times, you're your children's father, particularly those who don't have a father. So you're a father for the community. And in that, you take a pledge never, ever, ever to get violent against any female or anyone that you love. To treat all people, all mankind equal, women, gay, straight, it doesn't matter. What do you care? All you're focused on you and your family, your assignment. And that's really been what we've been pushing for in the fatherhood movement.
You want to say a few words about Deeds-Driven Dads?
Yes, I was just going to say that. Thank you so much. Deeds-Driven Dads is the eminent responsible fatherhood training and advocacy. We're different. We're an NGO for those who understand that language. NGOs or non-governmental organization throughout the world. And then our focus is on training and advocacy. Training in particular, because we've seen it all before. We've been in the Caribbean now for many years. We're still in the Caribbean now as we speak. Wonderful projects that are coming up, particularly in Jamaica. We're going to talk to you about that. But the long story short, Deeds-Driven Dads, we have to show the fathers. We can no longer assume that they know what the fine details on being a responsible, loving, nurturing father. We can't assume it. In fact, the data that was already presented, and we know clearly now, is that if we do make any assumptions, that he doesn't know. That 6, 7 out of 10 of the men that we're dealing with, boys up, they did not have a father in their life, Craig. They didn't have a strong father figure. This is the data, the surveys we take, a bazillion data surveys, we have to. And that always says that. Did you know your father? No. How do you feel about your father? I don't like him. And you don't even know him. And what's prevalent, particularly in the culture throughout the Caribbean, as we're going to speak to, and all the world. So that's where Deeds-Driven Dads came in. Is more than just the rhetoric and the talk, which is necessary. However, there's nothing like showing these fathers deeds, not words. Everybody, let me hear you say it. You don't have to turn your speaker on. Let me hear you say it. Joaquin, everybody, deeds, not words. You understand that? I see those lips moving. Let me see them. There you go. Fatherhood is deeds, not words. There you go, Willow. So in our fatherhood movement, Deeds-Driven Dads, we start with that, Craig. It's non-traditional. Oftentimes we have our fatherhood meeting at the laundromat in the islands. We'll find somebody who got a house, they got a washing machine and a line. So that's where we have our fatherhood meeting. Bring all your kids' laundry there. So it's a little bit more interactive. Daryl can tell you, Pastor Carlisle can tell you. So that's really what Deeds-Driven Dads is about, showing them the day-to-day needs, the routines, the schedules that you need to have, not only in just raising your family, but more importantly, and I want to say this to all of you so you can understand this, this is helping you. This is a self-therapeutic that once you take your children's lives and focus on their dreams and making sure, hey, where are they at today? What are they eating? Who are they with? What are they wearing? All of a sudden, your life starts changing. Your dreams start coming true. You start, hey, I got a shot. I can do these things from a man's point of view. All right? Got a reciprocal effect of the fatherhood piece, and that's what Deeds-Driven Dads is about. So we're just so honored. You saw some of the pictures. Daryl, that was a fantastic presentation. Pastor, too, both of you two, excellent on showing some of the effects. You all saw those photos. You saw the men's eyes. You saw how serious they were. This is a room full of men in Antigua. That was unheard of.
Sure,
we told it couldn't happen. Daryl can tell you. But look at the men. The room was packed, and all eyes and ears were open. That's the perfect time to say, hey, about gender equality. What does that mean? Domestic violence, raising your daughters, raising your sons, all of those types of things. All right? That's us.
Talk about for a minute the aspect that you are aware of in terms of encouraging equality with their partner, with getting along and being in a healthy relationship with their children's mother, for example.
Oh, you know, deeds will do that to you. Deeds, not words. Don't say it again. Let me see those lips. Shaki, tell them. Deeds, not words. Listen, you all know that when you take on the caregiver role, for real, do it. Give your 100% effort. I want to make sure I can do all things. As they mentioned earlier, that's not her role to do the dishes. It's not her role to make sure that the kids' uniforms are ready for school or anything like that. When a father assumes those, all the other stuff comes into line. The ill effects in the community when he doesn't changes to positives, you know, less violence. The kids are doing better in school, the programs, because he's involved, like truly involved. He's earning his stripes, if you will, as far as fatherhood. So that's what we know. One affects the other. Clearly, they have, as I said before, that synergy, that they're symbiotic, I think, in their nature. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. So if there's any more you want to share, we have a little more time. And if you'd like to just take questions, we could do it that way.
I would be honored. I'd be honored. But just let me say this, for those of you who are engaging in, and once again, Daryl, Pastor, those who I've worked with in the Caribbean, we're doing it in Jamaica. Get ready, Jamaica, we're ready. Bottom line is we have a couple of things that we're always encouraging our fathers to do, Craig. You know, you and I have talked about this many times. Coaches' keys to success. Daryl, you know these like the back of your hand, as will your men. First, faith. Encourage your men, regardless of whatever session you have them, whatever it is. Make sure they start building their faith again, Craig. We found that lots of the dads, they lost their faith. You know, when they were young, they didn't have anybody, they didn't have a man to push them. Have faith, do it. You could do this. You could do it. It was easy to give up. So tell them, faith, you could do this. You can get back in your children's life. Be a leader in the community, regardless of what you did before in the past, through your deeds, not words. After faith, ready for this one? Sacrifice. Raise your hand. Let me see your hand. If you have sacrifice, if you understand what it is to sacrifice. There you go. Sacrifice, Craig, you have to have it. Being a father or engaged parent means that you're going to sacrifice a lot of things. For instance, with the fathers, there's lots of training programs. Go back and get your GED. I remember we said sacrifice, not a choice. Sacrifice is different. Go back to school so that your kids can see you going back to school. And they say, I'm going to finish school because my father is finishing school. You know, I work 3 jobs plus make sure you go to school. I make sure you eat. My father does all those things. They'll do the same, especially the boys. All righty? Sacrifice for them. Next, patience. You have to have patience. I'm almost done, guys. I got to hit the road too. Patience. Patience is a virtue. We all heard that growing up. So make sure that when you're talking to your fatherhood programs and your men, regardless who it is, patience. Men tend to be, I need it now. I'm in a hurry. Hurry to do what? Where are you going? You better hope tomorrow comes. That's the only thing you're focused on in your family. So teach them patience. Next, commitment. This journey that they're on, as far as being a wonderful, loving father, is a lifelong commitment. Not when they're 18, not when they get married, not when they have their own lives. You're still their father forever. And if you be praying that your whole life, they're involved in your life. You don't want to be by yourself. Your kids are gone. What are you going to do? So last but not least, unconditional love. We encourage you to promote that. This is unconditional love. I love you no matter what. When the father exudes that when he puts that as his guide, right? His shield. I love you regardless. I know you're going to come with a crazy story. That's what kids do. It is what it is. However, they know that my father is going to be there regardless. He still loves me. He's still going to give me a hug, and we'll be all right. When you do that, those 5 keys, turn them simultaneously, it always opens the door for the fathers, no matter what. No matter what you came from, you were the black sheep, whatever. Turn those keys, next thing you know, Magali, the door opens up, all right? So that's the keys for success today, Craig, with the team. And we're so excited. And congratulations to the whole world. For those of you who are going to embark on this, fatherhood program is an open door for your audience. Those looking for men to talk to, the fatherhood program, I encourage you, get in contact with yours and say, hey, let's work together on this initiative. They will. Thanks, Craig.
That's great. Thank you. I'm so glad you're able to join us today.
Thank you.
And we're all on this path. We find that working with fathers is a significant engagement area that's available to us. And it's complicated in some respects, not necessarily easy to measure progress, but there are some things, and particularly things like promoting household work, household care is something you can measure. You can find out how many dishes someone is cleaning, or how many meals are they preparing, can be looked at. So I want to check back with Shaki and see if you would like to. We have about another half hour or so ish in our program, and before we start to wrap up, so we have plenty of time here for some conversation, and we can invite questions again from participants in the audience. Is there anything you want to ask Shaki of myself or Coach before we launch into?
Yes, I think it's excellent delivery in terms of what you guys have been working on, and it's very encouraging being in the space, hearing of what you guys are doing back in your vineyard and extended even into the Caribbean region. And we're happy to have a resource in you guys. I think it might be useful for me to better understand, because you referred the fatherhood program is it also a global network? Like a bit more information around that and how persons might be able to access it?
If you're thinking about Dee's Driven Dad, Coach can talk about his network. Why don't you say a few words? There's a variety of formal networks, particularly in the U.S. and Canada.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the global network is Men's Care with the S. I'll put that in the chat when we're done with this. menscare.org. Men's with the S. Men's Care is through Equimundo, which is really the global effort, if you will.
And that's a campaign-related piece of work, largely. Yeah.
And they're the ones that have the most global outreach, and they'll be able to give you to the regional representative. They can really help from a global perspective. They're very good, and they got ties everywhere.
Yeah, in the U.S., it's fatherhood.gov, which is kind of a government-sponsored piece along these lines. That's how far this work has gone in the U.S. Nurturing Fathers is established enough that there are trainings. You can go into an online training. You can join a affinity group of trainers to learn how to present the Nurturing Fathers curriculum, and there's handbooks and materials related to that program. It's well developed. That's why I wanted to share it. It's a strong program to jump off from if someone would like a strong starting place. Is that your question?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And lastly for me, and I'm seeing another comment coming from the group. I'm just really curious about, how there's your reiteration of the programs in North America, how it, because I heard you mentioned it and it just triggered for me, the avoiding of domestic violence conversations, and give a bit about the philosophy of that and how that operates. Because I think it's important for a conversation around gender equality, because that's one of the things that we,
It is. It's a challenge, and I'm wanting to hear people's different approaches to raising that successfully, because Coach can speak to this directly, where you get to the topic that leaders avoid it. That because of the topic, how do you be direct about domestic violence when you have a room of folks that you feel are perhaps perpetrators, or perhaps are a room of potential? What is the role that you're seeing your audience playing? Are these folks part of the solution? Are these folks part of the problem? Are these folks both? And so the strength-based approach is to think of the audience of fathers as being the solution. How they teach nurturance, how they would redirect, how they know their feelings, and how they would not approach power in that way. And they wouldn't wield violence as a way to get their position established. Our society puts men as a higher position, right? And so that they can enforce that with violence. It's a police state, it's a military state, it's all these pieces that allow males to have violence. And if you hang your hat on that as an identity, it's a problem. So teaching nurturance is supposed to be an antidote directly. So they're thinking they're preventing violence by teaching nurturance. But it's indirect, isn't it? It's indirect, right? It's not directly saying. Yeah. So if I'm I'm sorry, I interrupted
addressing
you.
Power? Sorry. Mm-hmm. Are you working through the power dynamics there, which is so integral as the linchpin of gender equality? Mm-hmm.
So it's how do you be direct about it successfully is the question, and to say that this is that. I'm going to turn that over to Coach. Like, where in a father's group, they say where violence starts and how you prevent it. Where does violence start and how do we prevent it? What is your experience, Coach, in these groups?
Well, what we're looking for now is to bring in the professionals that could address it as a therapeutic issue. It's more than a discussion. These guys have some, particularly the ones who reveal, right? When we have these men's meetings, they're very, this is very interpersonal. This is the real locker room for real. That's why they're so open. When we have man on man, mano y mano, peer to peer, they reveal and say a lot of things, particularly in that realm, but very cautiously because they don't know who's going to tell it. But when it's trusted, after a while, they say, wow, we trust this fatherhood movement. It really is for me. If we say we're going to bring in a speaker that's professional in this realm, you guys do the presentation as well as the follow-up. That's the key. We can't open that door, and then next thing you know, what? So that's why we're really bridging this gap now to make sure that we'll get you the audience and they'll be receptive to hear you, but make sure that we're passing you on to the right sources that will treat your case with impunity, just a lot of things, particularly in the Caribbean. As you know, the islands are so small. Antigua will be there in a few hours. We'll go across the island in a couple of hours. So, some information, you have to be very, very, very careful. And dealing with men and that domestic violence piece is very shaky ground, but not impossible, though. It just has to be presented in the right way. Gender equality, too.
Yeah, it's I find facilitators finding it difficult to raise the question because it's a criticism. I'm going to criticize you now. You're the perpetrator of violence, and so how are you going to avoid it? So I have another career, which is I worked with offenders of domestic violence for many years, and worked in many groups around that are the male offenders were in the room. That's why they were in the program, and they were referred by various sources. Many of them were dads. So we had both, we could talk about both of these things, but they were there because of their violent behavior. And so we could be direct, we're supposed to be direct about it. And I find bringing a person who does that work into a dad's group just to talk about the work. What is it like to prevent violence? What is complicated about it? What is it like to objectify your partner and make them like a thing? What is it like to feel like you do what I say do or else, to threaten somebody just about my authority, and why it's so, and how we have to get away from that. We have to get away from that together. And we have to give each other space to learn our way out of that approach. And it's they need one another. It tends not to be successful one-on-one. There's more success in the group saying, yeah, we can do this together. And we can help each other out in this way. But I'd like to blend these two professions, like folks who are doing interventions with domestic violence, to give information to dads groups. Because you can think of fathers as part of the solution, and that's the strength-based celebration we want to bring, the idea of healthy, positive masculinity as an antidote, because nowhere in that box is violence. we teach another program which has to do with masculinity challenges, and we do the traditional man box exercise many of us in the room know about, and you put a father's box next to it, and a lot of the things don't go in it.
Nothing
that are in the man box. They don't go in the father box.
Look at that. That's the graphic. The empty box, Betty. You see it?
It's not. And so how do we do this? And as a father, am I supposed to not be a man?
Right.
These are interesting contradictions that the society brings to us. And to have a room where we get to talk about it is helpful. And now you get to teach your son something differently. So there's the prevention path. Love to hear some other audience comments. I see a hand up in front of me. Sita, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent conversations, and congratulations to all of you doing such path-breaking work. My question is more around co-parenting. It's great that y'all are working with fathers on fatherhood, but there is a mother involved as well.
That's right.
Whether they are together or not together. So I wanted to know how much of spousal communication and co-parenting related issues are done. And it's also not fair to say that perpetuators are always only men. There could be issues with women too. Being a woman, I'm happy to accept that as well. So if men are being trained and they are doing their job, what is happening to the women to make sure that they are being supportive and there's a co-parenting happening and a holistic environment is built for the child, because that's very important. And spousal communication. So my question is, how do you all deal with this in your trainings or your conversations with men? Thank you.
Sure. I think everyone can speak to that briefly. Coach, why don't you speak a few words about how you support relations and co-parenting, and then we can toss it over to some folks from the Caribbean.
Sure. There are a lot. They work on it more extensively than I. Bottom line is, unfortunately, there's so many different types of relationships. We don't try to come in assuming it's the old mother, wife, husband, kids. And the statistics show us now that's rarely the case. Now we got one man, he's got kids over here. The whole scenarios are so different. So there is no one real way except this. When kids are involved, and that's the linchpin, that's the connecting tie. And when we're having negotiations and communications, that we always doing what's best for the child, which means sacrifice on both. I don't want to hear all that. What's best for the child? You pick them up. And we found that oftentimes when the father picks up his weight and more, we have less arguing, less madness at the courthouse, less confrontations about visitation, because he's just on it. He loves it. I don't have to ask him for nothing. And we found that so that's what we can do. We can shore that one up.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will help the relationships.
Yeah, and one of the principles some of the programs add is just safe relations with partners, safe relations with your child's mother. And so working on that and thinking about that. Shaki, do you want to ask one of your presenters to say a few words about this? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you. If Daryl or Philip, you can chime in. I can also share a bit about what happens in the Grenada context as it relates to co-parenting, and when Daryl or Philip can chime in as it relates to their jurisdiction. For us particularly, it's interesting work because the whole conversation is, there's the legal aspect, there's the social, and obviously we're trying to put everything together and introduce the gender equality, which is a very important part to it. And so for us, we generally intervene at the legal side, as Craig would have mentioned. That is a traditional entry. So once we hear co-parenting, we know it's coming from a social justice standpoint. And that in itself creates some challenges, because we know that oftentimes if it is around, child support and access and coming up to some agreement, there's this tension, this inherent tension between the two parties, and it's difficult to navigate. At a clinic, legal aid and counseling clinic, which covers a lot of that kind of programming in Grenada, they try to engage having conversations rather than having the court settle it, where they have a mediation process, where they're sitting together and discussing terms, recognizing that it's a useful place to interject the transformative gender agenda in terms of having persons think through. So what we've done at Legal Aid, particularly in another hat that I used to that I wore, we would have these couples talk about the issues, their access issues on one point, which is usually the way it's settled. One person, I want to see my child, the other person, I need money for financial support. And so they may come to the table with these two major concerns, and we delicately introduce the idea of perhaps what is the root of this problem as power, and talk about, how we're sharing the space now that the two of you are no longer together, and working through those gender relations there. And so it has been very useful, because oftentimes, just similar to the aha moments that happens perhaps in Craig's program as well as in Steve Coach program, there's this aha moment where there's this recognition of how we've been negotiating and the power inequality, and you find that sometimes they're more willing to work through and share this space well in a way that's respectful of each other. And so I think that's what I can offer as it relates to how we interject the co-parenting as an agreement that is between the two parties, and interject gender transformative approach there.
Sure.
Yeah, Darryl, here, I'm just going to chime in very quickly. That is a very important part, and I think that is something that we're still, as Shaki mentioned, so there's a legal aspect to it, wherein in most instances, these issues are really only raised where it comes to a couple of things, where there's been conflict, domestic conflict, or where there has been, or there's a, child care or protection order. So I'm actually currently working on a very recent behavioral change program for perpetrators, male perpetrators of domestic violence. And what we would have found is it is also very important for the men to also feel that the women have been engaged. As much as we know the statistics that men are, by and large, the primary perpetrators of gender-based violence, in many instances, there are some involvement in terms of their partners. So it's very important for us to now begin looking at, which is not something we really have stressed on before, providing services for women on the other end in terms of counseling and support, and also looking at how we can have an equal understanding in terms of how violence is perpetrated, and how to provide those services for women and for men. And I would say we have technology now. So in many instances, the use of apps that are specific to persons who may have shared custody of children is something that I think we here in the Caribbean need to look at a bit more, to try and reduce a lot of the conflict that happens when, unfortunately, two parents who are in conflict need to meet, to share children, to share information. So I think the use of technology is something that is very important and can be adopted here to help reduce those aspects of conflict.
Thanks for that. And I try, yeah.
I put in the chat a link to a center I know of that utilizes the Nurturing Fathers curriculum I mentioned earlier. That curriculum ties to an additional curriculum called Nurturing Families. And so the idea of a comprehensive program is you have something for the dads, something for the moms in separate ways, and then combine them later. So if you have the resources to do for several programs, you can combine them and incorporate co-parenting education in that process. So it depends on your resources. But that this particular program does think along those lines, that you're not just working with dads, you're working with entire families here, ultimately, and helping them through in a safe way, and promoting equity and cooperation. And I want to say that's, pushing the social norms boundary. as was mentioned earlier, in some of the experiences that, well, some dads saying, well, I was never asked to be with my kids. That's because society expects something, and we're shifting that expectation. We want to shift that expectation by saying, no, we can do this differently now. And, we want to release the pressure, and one person mentioned violence perpetrated by women. I think it's a different experience than violence perpetrated by males. It's not equal, as much as folks would like to talk about it in some equal context. It's not equal. It exists. I've worked with many male survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence their contexts are always unique. And so it's something that we embrace the reality of. Verbal talking, I notice that many men are not trained well to express their feelings or to talk, just to talk. And so these groups are promoting the ability just to share, to talk, to be engaged, to be connected. And connection is something that we feel we're promoting, is learning to connect in a way that therefore things are released, pressures are released. You're upset about something, you talk about it. You're happy about something, you talk about it. This is what we're looking for in terms of relations, and that we're to be proud of it and consider it a factor of strength to be able to be these ways as males. So I guess I'd like to we have about 20 minutes here. We're not done. We have time. We can answer questions. I'm going to find out if I'd love to know more about how the question of criticism comes up in dads groups. If there's particularly how you just handle that, and how we think about we have to take more responsibility, or you have to add expectations in these sessions, and how we address these things more directly is a challenge, and that I've been around for a number of years in the work, and it's a different room when it's men only than when there's a combined genders and gender expressions in the room. And that I think the male only group drifts towards the norm, towards the center, towards the common value, not towards the new values, towards not criticizing each other, not confronting each other, not saying don't do this, don't do that, or please do this instead. It's more towards congratulations. We are who we are. We're good guys, and so is that accountability? It's just something that we want to, how do we promote be proud for accountability, proud for change, proud for wanting things to be different. And so that's what a group can help with. I think it's a challenging moment in a group, and a challenge for a leader to promote that conversation, to go in that direction, and to have a woman in the room in a dad's group, to have a mother in the room as a co-leader is a new context. And many other leaders in these programs are women, and do that and do something on purpose with that dynamic. It can be quite useful. So I just wanted to raise some of those things. I see a hand up, Shanti.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this. And I've been a happy watcher of Men Engage for a few years now. I work with Seroptimus International and the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and I'm a child advocate. I'm also a mother, and today is my son's 35th birthday. And apropos, my son and his father are estranged. His father reached out to me after several years of comparative silence, concerned that he was losing connection with my son. I'm not able to bring this up with my son because I don't know how he's going to react, because he is disappointed in both his father and myself, and puts us in the same baby boomer basket. And, it gets psychological, everything. But today, his father plans to go by his house and give him a birthday card. And so I said, well, maybe you'll be able to give him a hug. But how do I'm not with his father. I love my son unconditionally. I love his father unconditionally. how do I, as the mother, help two men accept each other and love each other? I know my son wants to be a father, and I understand healing the father wound is an important part of being a successful father. So I'm asking for some advice here.
Sure. Well, I imagine there's advice in the room
Yeah.
along these lines. And I'll invite folks to offer where they'd like in the chat some thoughts about that. I mean, I'll give my first thought, and which is that support systems matter, and encouraging your partner to the father to connect with other fathers and perhaps a father's program, just to say, I can talk about my relation with my son and how to mend it. He wants to mend it. There may be an apology to go along with this. I mean, there is that we bring our, what I'm going to call kind of our learnings, our context. And maybe I didn't listen to my son. Maybe I forced my son into things. Maybe I wasn't there as often as my son would have liked, which would meant there's an apology and to be made along the way. But I think there are, the support systems matter, and encouraging support systems and connections is what I often encourage.
Thank you.
So thank you. Other thoughts? Jacqueline?
Hi, how are you doing? This is Jacqueline from Grenada. And I was really happy to hear Shaki raise the context within which these issues are often raised, certainly within the Caribbean setting, where there's this inextricable link between fathers' involvement with children, raising children and nurturing and family care versus parental obligations to financially support their children. Like, these conversations always happen together within our context in the Caribbean. You can hardly talk about a father's right or fathers, the encouragement of fathers with their children without some discussion about that parental obligation to financially support. And I suppose it takes on increased significance in settings where, financial hardship is definitely an issue, and where social safety nets through the state are not readily available, not readily accessible. So it comes down to, this mother and father, because you cannot rely on the state for the kind of financial support that you would need. And I'm just wondering how helpful or how harmful are those two discussions being, when they're juxtaposed in that way, how harmful or how helpful are they? And to get your feedback on that, especially as it relates to the gender equality agenda. Is it helping it? Is it hindering it? Are these difficult discussions that we have to have? Or should we be trying to separate these two issues a little bit more than they have been, certainly within the Caribbean?
Sure, thank you. Shaka, do you want to answer or toss it to someone?
I think it's and thank you for raising that, Jackie, because I mean, from the onset, and I hope that the broader audience can appreciate that within the Caribbean we are really grappling and trying to come up with some things that would be helpful, and so raising this question really gives us an opportunity to put some spotlight on a key issue as it relates to how are we going to do this well, so that we can build back in a way that's equal, and as we also at a really good place in the Caribbean where there's a cry for these kinds of resources, these kinds of interventions, but it's about how are we are we thinking about doing them in ways that are really creating the kind of impact that we want, rather than just doing things in an ad hoc way. And I agree to a great extent when the hard reality of on the ground, in terms of the court cases, the amount of persons who are before the court as it relates to not just to financial support. It's overwhelming, and that burden has to be addressed in a way that recognizes that this is a reality. But I was happy to hear, and that's why it's so valuable to be in spaces like this. I was happy to hear Coach talk about, that approach that they've used as it relates to having these spaces where you have a broader curriculum and it covers so much more than these issues, but it does touch this issue as well. And so it might be useful to use that approach where it is not a conversation that's taken off the agenda, but it is strategically placed there that so it facilitates the objective. Because at the end of the day, resistance, going into a space and the gender-based violence topic as being the front might derail the entire conversation. And so if we're talking about having a space that is designed to achieve these three objectives, then we might have to think about how we're structuring it. The intervention has to be more well-placed so that we can have the kind of impact that we want, which is the participation, which came across so clearly from Daryl's presentation, that the men were willing to participate, and we want that. And so we have the interest and the motivation to participate, and thinking about how we can include within those packages the items that are gender transformative, making sure as a benchmark. I think another colleague would have mentioned that as a benchmark within these interventions. Yes, we want them to come. Yes, we want them to participate, but we also want impact and we want to see achievements and results in those other areas as it relates to the things that are going to lead to greater equality. I don't know if that
Sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Shaki, I think that kind of answers the question, but one of the issues is that our institutional settings are going to have to also keep up with this, in that if our courts are still sort of attributing more value to monetary contributions as opposed to care of children, and setting up this dichotomy really of child support versus involvement with your children. I think that it has to translate. All of this work still has to translate at the institutional level as well, where perhaps courts are viewing care by both parents with more, attaching more value to it and more significance to it than is currently happening. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I get what you're talking about. If you think about the social norm of providing, I'm the provider, is strong in many places in the world. And but then it gets detached from providing care. It's providing funds, providing money, and providing care is not in the same category. And so I can be a provider by cleaning house, by taking care of the lunches, by taking care of healthcare and going to the doctor. I can be providing. And so by expanding the definition, we call recasting or reframing providing, will help. The more we talk about it, we can influence our decision makers. And I think your point about that, where the courts think about fathers as the child support provider, like money. And then that puts the fathers who don't have a resource for funds in a tough position. They've got to figure it out. So a lot of times, that's where the program that I was mentioning earlier with our State Department of Social Services, one of the influencers was the Department of Revenue. Our Department of Revenue was implementing the child support gathering program, like how do you get the child support in? How do you get those funds in? How do you do with the bank accounts? And this individual that I know here in our area works with Department of Revenue to get them to think differently with the dads who don't have any money. And particularly the men who are in the rears and aren't spending, aren't able to provide money. What can we do for them to improve their situation so they can become providers? So let's do some programs, let's do some resources and shift the providing question around a little bit. I think it's a great topic. I think there's a lot of work to be done in that particular topic. Shanti raised her hand again.
Oh, hey, I wanted to tell everybody about this great workshop I took, and it was so helpful. It was with a male and female leader. And so say it was a group of 20 people, men and women. And the women sat with the woman, and we talked about what it was like to be a woman from birth till death, everything. And the men did the same, what it's like to be a man from birth till death. So like men, oh, you're not supposed to cry, be a man, you're supposed to, you have the pressure of being the provider, blah. So, I mean, this was years ago. And so things have changed. There's, more fluidity, et cetera, these days. But it's so helpful for men and women to understand what life is like from their perspective. It kind of takes that barrier, the male-female barrier, away. And so after we did that, the two facilitators changed places, and the women sat with the man and vice versa. And after I went through being a man from birth till death, I felt so much armor, so much like, heading out into the world and ready to fight. And just, I just felt so much armor and an inability to cry and be vulnerable, which women have that joy really to be able to feel. And it helps us be the more nurturing. And so these might be old stereotypes, but still, I think it's very helpful because to me, it just boils down to we're all men and women, or we're all boys and girls, and we just need to understand, because that's the basic dichotomy out of which are born children. So anyway, I just wanted to share that workshop as a possibility for everybody who leads workshops.
That's great. Thank you. Sounds good. So Shaka, do you have we're wrapping up into final comments time. 10 minutes to the hour.
Yeah.
We'll start thinking about our final comments, our questions that are lingering.
Yeah, I think, for me, some great take homes, and in terms of things to continue reflecting on and fine tuning, would be, that really putting our fingers on what is the link between parenting and how we perpetuate gender inequalities, and really thinking about what are some of the things that, if we're going to use that tool, that vehicle for engaging fathers to get there, what are some of the benchmark things that we should have within any engagement, any action, any intervention to ensure that we're meeting that that milestone. And I particularly liked adding to my list of things to reflect on about looking at the broader system in terms of, how might we be able as a network, as organizations, to influence and advocate. I think we've been doing a lot about that and around that, but to perhaps create a plan, be more strategic around what are our asks as it relates to how they might be able to support moves towards, gender equality as it relates to parenting and the value that they place on which and what. So it's really, really, really interesting to learn from you, and thank the facilitators as well for sharing some of those ideas. I will definitely be touching base with checking out some of the resources that were shared, and to keep the space, alive and the benefits to be utilized even beyond.
Sure. I was wondering, Coach had to leave, but I'm wondering if Daryl or Joseph had something to add or summarize with, something you'd like to share.
So let's check Philip, because I know Daryl as well as Joseph had to
go. Okay.
Philip has also left.
Okay. So it's all right. So it's us.
Yeah.
It's wonderful though to be together. I think that there's a long road here, but it's a fertile one. I think it's a value. I think it has a lot of opportunity. Dads want to be with their kids largely, and so there's an opportunity for education and engagement. And it doesn't have to be gender transformative, right? The traditions are there. So it is our job to add those dimensions, and to encourage those dimensions, and to encourage things and to show that going in that direction provides a healthier family, a safer family and community. And so I bet we could, as you said, Shaq, make a list of the most important things we bring to the table. And we hope that in creative ways we can promote. But thank you for this today. It was a delight.